Namaskar and welcome to Sansad Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you detailed analysis of key national and international issues. Today we're going to talk about India-Russia bilateral relations. Now, Russia has been a long-standing and time-tested partner for India. Development of India-Russia relations has been a key pillar of India's foreign policy. During his recently concluded two-day visit to Russia, External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar strongly backed India's increasing oil imports from Russia, saying energy ties with Moscow have worked to India's advantage. Jaishankar also had held detailed discussions with his Russian counterpart on Ukraine conflict and said that a global economy is too interdependent not to be impacted by a significant conflict, and the global south is feeling this pain very acutely. India strongly advocated return to dialogue and diplomacy. Both sides also discussed regional issues, including the situation in Afghanistan and West Asia as well. So today, we'll discuss and analyze all aspects of this bilateral relationship. And for more on this, we're joined by a distinguished panel of experts. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with the former Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, who is here with us in the studio. Welcome to Sansad Television, Ambassador Trigunayat. We also have with us Mr. Pramit Pal Chaudhary. He is the Foreign Affairs Editor with Hindustan Times. And Fred Weir, senior journalist and an expert on Russian affairs, is also joining us. Welcome, both of you gentlemen as well. I'll begin with you, Mr. Trigunayat. All of us know that as far as India-Russia relations are concerned, they're on a very strong wicket. Goes back well in time, share a lot of ties in all aspects, be it defense cooperation, people-to-people connect, economy as well. But in today's state, specifically when we're looking at the geopolitical situation, how crucial and significant do you think this bilateral relation between India and Russia is, not only to both these nations, but also to the larger global community?
Thank you, Vishal. In fact, you rightly mentioned that this relationship is time-tested and trusted. And from my personal experience, I can tell you that President Putin himself, from the time that he came onto stage from 2000 onwards, he has been personally invested in relationship with India a great deal. We have these special and privileged partnership which has established the annual summits, and the visit of Dr. Jaishankar to Moscow now was a precursor to the summit level meetings that happen annually. So the relationship is not only during this time, but it has weathered many a crisis. And I think for the Russians, for India, and for the global good, this has been some kind of a balancing partnership. And it has been strategically advantageous to us, both during the Soviet times, later the Russian times, and even today, when India is also in the Security Council and has taken a very principled stand. Now, you can imagine that India's principled stand may not be to the liking of the Western countries, but it has been globally appreciated because it is not simply driven by your own individual interest. Of course, national interest is supreme for any foreign policy objective. And that's why what you mentioned about the oil and other things, and Dr. Jaishankar's statement repeatedly says it all. But our relationship is very wide, and institutionalized in that manner. And therefore, it is extremely important from our perspective. And India has a voice of reason today in the world. And coming out as a country which has its strategic autonomy, its own mind. And President Putin recently during the World Eye discussions also praised a great deal both Prime Minister Modi and the Indian people for their enterprise. So it's on the rise, whereas the rest of the West are struggling. And this war is not a creation of one person. I think everybody is to be equally blamed for it. In 21st century, we are not looking at invasion of a country. India does not condone it. We have clearly said that we respect the UN Charter. We respect the territorial integrity, sovereignty of. So whose sovereignty? It's about, we are talking about Ukraine in that sense. So India has emerged as a reliable and a trusted interlocutor whose interest lies in peace only.
Okay. Pramit, two significant statements from the External Affairs Minister during this visit, and those statements are reiteration of India's stand, something which the EAM himself, Prime Minister and various other officials of the Indian government had repeated at various forums. One, vis-a-vis India buying Russian oil, and two, vis-a-vis the Ukraine conflict, wherein India has once again pointed out that peace and dialogue is the only way out. What does this indicate in today's stage?
Well, there are many ways, two different things. India is very clear that Indian oil companies will be allowed to opportunistically buy oil wherever they can get it at the cheapest possible price, because we are facing severe inflationary pressures, and energy was a major energy problem crisis, especially in the April to June period. And therefore, that would be our overriding national interest. So we at different times bought from Russia, we bought from Iraq, we bought from Saudi Arabia, we still do, depending on whoever gave the Indian oil companies involved the lowest price. Russia, in fact, is not a natural energy partner for us. We traditionally do not buy Russian oil because of simple just market forces and geography. But because of the discounts, it became highly attractive. And as Dr. Jaishankar said, this is something that India will continue to do. But as our oil and gas minister, Hardeep Puri, has said, it will be up to the individual oil companies of India to decide where they will get the lowest price. But we are not going to allow any other country to dictate where we buy, depending on, as I said, on what we see as our economic interest in that. The second part, however, we've been seeing more and more evidence that India has been trying to play, if you wish, a quiet diplomatic role between Russia and the Ukraine and to some degree the West. We saw Dr. Jaishankar say in New Zealand recently that when he was that India had been asked to send a message to Vladimir Putin about the initial fighting around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear reactor. Mm-hmm. You've seen reports in the Washington Post and the New York Times that Modi had been talking to both Zelensky, but mainly to Putin. And we saw Dr. Jaishankar basically try to give Putin, if he wishes to take it, an escape route to say that you can make the case, if I would argue, make the case that I am prepared to begin a dialogue on this war because the global South, not because the West is demanding it, but because the global South is suffering as a consequence of this war.
Okay.
And we can see countries like Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, in our neighborhood have undergone major economic meltdowns because of these energy prices. So he's basically laid out that thing. And if you see other reports that we've seen that at the G7 summit, Modi was urged by the Western leaders to consider using his good offices with both Putin, to a lesser extent with Zelensky, to consider a mediation process or play that role as a mediator. Indian diplomacy, unlike, let's say, France, which has been equally, if not more active in such a role, but much more public, has been much quieter, but has really focused on maintaining the relationship with Russia and what the ambassador mentioned, our longstanding relationship with Russia, to be able to provide some degree of communication. And I think my sense is that for Putin, at least, and for Russia, India is an interlocutor which they would not have any problems working with, as opposed to, for example, France, which is, after all, the NATO member.
Okay. Fred, I'd like to bring you in here, and we would like to understand the Russian perspective on the Indian stand vis-a-vis the Ukraine conflict, wherein time and again we have reiterated that the best way or best recourse is for both the parties to come to the dialogue table, engage in peace talks. And the effect on global South, the way out, as Pramit was pointing out, how does Russia perceive that?
Well, on one level, Russia, in general, I think Russia is pretty satisfied with India's position. It is, as you all point out, no surprise. It's a long-standing relationship. It's always been reliable through crisis after crisis. But in some ways, this is probably the worst. And early on in this war, there was a huge amount of pressure, I think you all know pretty well, to get everybody on board with the Western campaign against Russia. There were people who came over, and there were veiled threats, I believe, threats of secondary sanctions. and whatnot against India. And I think that Russia feels quite reassured by the fact that India has remained steadfast, even if in an opportunistic way as regards oil. I think that in this sense, it's part of a bigger package. I think India continues to buy Russian arms. India and the basic relationship remains solid, even if Indians are not pleased with Russia's war in Ukraine, and very few people are. I think Russia has pretty decisively lost the information war. But nevertheless, this remains. And it's not just India, it's quite a lot of countries of the global south that take this position of non-alignment or neutrality. And secondly, and in a more practical way, the reassurances that were given in Moscow yesterday basically break that American G7 oil cap campaign, because, there is a big hope launched by the G7 to create a global oil cartel that would cap Russian oil prices at a very low level, basically cost of production. And in order to make a thing like that work, you have to get big consumers on board, at least enough of them to really put the pressure on Russia and make them obey the rules. But I think what has been decided there or reiterated there in Moscow just busts that whole idea for Washington. And also, I would point out that beyond buying oil, I think India is going to get some juicy deals in Russian oil production and investment out of this.
Okay. Fred, one more question. That is, what is it that Russia is looking forward to from India vis-a-vis, the present situation, geopolitical situation, and of course, the conflict which we are looking at here?
Well, I do agree with Pramit that if it comes to a point, and it isn't anywhere near that point, where negotiations might take place that are meaningful and could formulate some kind of a lasting settlement there, I don't think the Russians are going to be interested in any Western mediation. And countries like India, Turkey, China, even Israel could step in there. But India is one that Russia would definitely trust and be happy to sit across the table from.
Okay. Preferred choice there, as you were earlier also referring to, Ambassador Trigunath. Now, let's talk about other aspects also, because these are not just the issues, or the only issues which both sides are trying to find a way around and perhaps, look at their own national interests also. For example, the discussions during the External Affairs Minister's visit also included the situation in Afghanistan, the situation in West Asia as well. These are also issues of concern for both India and Russia. So where do we stand there, Ambassador Trigunath?
Well, I think that during these meetings, as I mentioned, they are normally held before the summit level meetings that happens annually. And this was the fifth time that Dr. Jaishankar met with his counterpart, Mr. Lavrov. But this was essentially, the visit was more catering towards IRIGC, which is Indo-Russia Intergovernmental Commission, both for trade economic cooperation, where the total gamut of the bilateral trade, investment, the roadblocks, the road ahead, the roadmaps, and the issues that could be raised at the level of the top leadership, those are all decided. At the same time, we always continue to exchange. You know that visits have been taking place, discussions have been happening. Mr. Rajnath Singh, Defense Minister, spoke. NSA was there in August. And then we had these meetings and discussions on various international issues. This time, Afghanistan, of course, is of extreme importance to India, as you know. And this is what Dr. Jaishankar also mentioned, that Afghanistan cannot be forgotten amidst this kind of another crisis which is happening, because Afghanistan is also going through major problems. Of course, Taliban is one dimension of it, But then the Afghan people are the another dimension. The humanitarian crisis there is. So India, in the meantime, as you know, has opened this mission also, is providing humanitarian assistance. And there are going to be Moscow format of talks in which they have invited India to be part of. So we have been working together in Afghanistan, and Russia has been engaged in Afghanistan ever since they left during the Soviet times. So they have been trying to maintain, and they have maintained their embassy, they have maintained their dialogue with the Taliban and others. So they are far more closer in that dimension. At the same time, the West Asia-Iran nuclear deal is extremely important, because if something happens in West Asia, which is what India does not want, it is of immediate and critical concern for us. So if we have any kind of a conflagration there, that will have an immediate impact on India's overall well-being and overall health, be it our diaspora, be the energy supplies, be the food, fertilizer supplies. So everything is going to be under. So this is extremely important. And today's time and age, when there is a perception in the Middle East or West Asia that USA is trying to extricate in order to focus more on the Indo-Pacific, it is important that, and other countries like China and Russia are trying to fill that gap, so is Turkey and others. So India is also very much there, both for its necessity as well as for its presence as a rising power, an acceptable power, benign power in the region. So therefore, both these issues are extremely important for us.
Okay.
Apart from that, the UN reforms and all kinds of things are routinely discussed.
Indeed. Yes. Pramit, do you agree that Afghanistan and West Asia are equally important for us, and then continue to hold that prominent space in our national concerns?
Is a part of, if you wish, our larger neighborhood. And in West Asia, particularly in the Gulf, we have now become much more active, especially with our new relationship with the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. Both have effectively given up on Pakistan as a country to look to. And they see their economic future, both an oil and gas future as well as a post-hydrocarbon future, much more closely linked with India. Afghanistan is interesting because that was actually an area where India and Russia did disagree in the past. Russia felt that the removal of the American military presence would be a good thing. India felt that that was a big mistake. And we saw, for example, among a lot of the Central Asian republics, joining India in supporting us in saying that the American removal and the arrival of the Taliban was dangerous. Now, however, I would argue we've seen that the Taliban, strangely enough, has been reaching out to India, and in fact has been spending more time fighting Pakistan than us. So we have sent vaccines, we have sent food, we have helped out the Taliban regime in a level that I think nobody in India would have expected. So it now gives a degree of convergence with us and Russia to see how we can, if you wish, I wouldn't say tame the Taliban, but try to keep the Taliban from becoming a completely rogue government one more time. And both we and the Central Asian republics, in particular Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Tajikistan, have been working very hard on making sure that any terrorist threat out of Afghanistan is kept in check, and that's something, of course, Russia also supports. So yes, there are in these areas we are back to, I think, agreeing, or we and the Russians are working together again. The Russians had initially, for example, been opposed to our military presence in Tajikistan and now support it. And the base that we have there, half base, is back in partial action, if you wish. And there are now other areas. I think the other point besides oil and military weapons, I should point out fertilizers. In many ways, more than anything else, the Indian government, when I talked to our officials, saying that there's a pending fertilizer crisis globally, which nobody seems to be paying much attention to. But given our agrarian requirements and global requirements, given we are a big exporter of many of these crops now, this is an enormous issue, and our buying both potash and urea from Russia and Belarus has been also part of our negotiations with Russia.
Okay. Fred, all of us understand and know that as well that the Ukraine conflict with Ukraine is a sort of a all hands on deck situation for Russia. But vis-a-vis, these two other regions, when we're talking about situation in Afghanistan, situation in West Asia, those are the areas of concern for India in many ways. So what is the Russian thought or Russian strategy on these two regions here, the process which they would pursue or are pursuing as of now?
I think that Russia can, chew gum and walk at the same time, as Americans like to say. They have a lot of resources still devoted to what they call the CIS, or the near abroad. They're heavily involved in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and they see that as a forum now in future. And in general, Russia is completely reorienting its diplomatic and economic and other priorities toward the East. This is happening partly due to force majeure. It was going on as a natural process, and now it's accelerating very fast. I think my sense of the mood among Russian foreign policy experts is that they've completely given up on the West, on any idea of a compact with the United States or any kind of grand bargain. And they're even detaching from the former idea of integration or economic integration with the European Union, which is no longer their main trading partner. Neither the energy flow to the West nor the flow of expertise and consumer goods and whatnot from the West to Russia. That's all a broken system now. And Russia is looking to reorient everything, including its economic supply chains, toward Asia. So in the long term, no matter how this war turns out, I think you're going to see that major shift, tectonic shift of Russia toward Asia, where it will continue to try to diversify its relationships. Though China is awfully important to Russia, I think that they have a lot of attention to other countries, and especially India among them. So it's going to be interesting times, no matter what happens on the battlefield in the next few months.
Okay. Let me take that China point to Mr. Trigunath before we bring this to a close. As Fred was pointing out, there's going to be a tectonic shift in Russian strategy or policy, and it's going to be more tilted towards Asia, as Fred was referring to. That's pretty much evident as well. When we're talking about India and Russia relationship, the bilateral cooperation and all that, the China question, the China angle is something which both sides will have to deal with. How do you think that's going to happen?
Well, firstly, I fully agree with the assessment of Fred in this. The one thing one has to remember always, that China is going to be a permanent challenge for India. A policy of competition and cooperation will have to be tweaked time and again following dialogue and diplomacy, not the war. As far as Russia is concerned, I have a theory, and that is that in order to confront the West, Russia needs China in a global geopolitical context. But in order to counter China's excessive influence within this, it needs India. So India in any way is very well placed insofar as Russia and China relationship is concerned.
Okay. Interesting situation there, and we'll have to keep a watch on those developments. Thank you so much, Mr. Trigunath, Pramit as well, and Fred for sharing your views and insight when we're talking about the India-Russia bilateral relationship, various contours, various aspects of immediate significance, of short-term, and of course, the long-term perspective from both Russia side as well as from the Indian side. National concerns, geopolitical issues as well. We'll keep a close watch on all the developments and come back again with a different topic. Till then, keep watching Sansad Television. Thank you.